start and just thank you for attending our panel here. A lot of really interesting topics being presented, and we appreciate you joining ours. My name's Matt Siska. I'm a principal with GDS Associates based here in Bedford, New Hampshire. I'm going to be moderating today's panel. My firm works in a lot of different areas of energy and energy efficiency throughout New Hampshire and the Northeast. And availability and affordability of housing is a topic that just keeps coming up in my world. One of our roles is that of the NH Saves Coordinator for Workforce Development in Energy. Building up this energy workforce is one of the biggest challenges that I see preventing us from reaching our climate goals. And lack of affordable housing is a major barrier to that workforce in New Hampshire. Something I learned during the study phase that we did of workforce needs in New Hampshire is that New Hampshire is currently the #1 state in the country for the percentage of graduating high school students who leave the state after graduation. And as the parent of a high school student, I'll say it's not the good #1. Housing, the availability and the affordability of housing was cited as one of the primary issues driving this exodus. And it is a major barrier to us trying to invest more in trades, in electricians and HVAC technicians, weatherization professionals, trying to build this up. Housing is just something that keeps coming up and again. This issue also struck home for me and GDS in just the last few months. We're a growing team. We recently hired a new associate engineer, graduated from a university in Massachusetts and was looking to relocate in New Hampshire. And this provided to be a real challenging endeavor. Given high costs and availability. And mind you, this young man is making a decent salary as a recent graduate and energy engineer. This is an issue that affects a wide swath of our population and transcends industries. It's also clearly a hot-button political issue. Current estimates are that there is a national shortage of over 4 million housing units, and multiples more of that will be needed to keep up with population growth in the coming decades. In preparing for this panel and discussing with Sam and Beth and the folks at Clean Energy New Hampshire, something I learned that really fascinated me was the overlooked link between housing and climate. The need for more housing is clear. How we meet that need is going to have an outsized impact on our climate ambitions. Better located, less car-dependent communities with energy-efficient structures have potential to dramatically reduce emissions compared to alternative approaches. In my research, another thing that became clear is that land use regulations are a complex web with a lot of varied opinions, especially in New Hampshire. So to help bring some clarity to that issue, I'm pleased to introduce Alyssa Margolin as our first speaker. Alyssa is a director with Housing Action New Hampshire, a coalition working to improve state and federal policy so that everyone in New Hampshire has a place to call home. Alyssa will help to frame the need and political climate in New Hampshire around this issue, then present some case studies to really ground the issue for us. Welcome, Alyssa.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. Good morning. As Matt said, I serve as Director of Housing Action New Hampshire. We're New Hampshire's statewide affordable housing coalition. So our members are those who develop, finance, and manage affordable housing properties, homeless service providers, supportive housing providers, public housing agencies, and low-income family advocates. When Sam Evans-Brown called me and asked me to be part of your conference, I did the usual, I really don't think that I should be the one to do this. I don't really speak energy, and I've just, housing's has been super intense lately, and I really don't know what I'm going to bring to your conference. And as a good executive director, he's like, yes, we really need to get out of our silos and make connections, and convince me to do this. So anyway, I'm here to tell you what I know. I'm sure I have a lot to learn from you as well. You are probably very used to the word crisis, and I feel connected to you in that way, and probably your frustrations in talking with either our political leaders or even your communities about that, and feeling like crisis isn't just enough. And Matt did a nice job of talking about anecdotal ways we're all feeling the housing crisis, and there's good data to back up why people are having such a hard time. This is, I think, a jaw-dropping statistic, and that is that In order to afford a typical two-bedroom apartment in New Hampshire, you now need to earn over $73,000 a year. And that data point is from New Hampshire Housing's latest residential rental cost survey. I don't know, but when I graduated law school in '94, my first job as I worked for a congressman, I was on his political team. I ran his race, his congressional race, and I made $16,000 at a law school. Yes, so I couldn't was very far from being able to afford that kind of apartment. And we need a lot of units. So we know that right now on the rental side, we're over 23,000 units short right now, and laws of supply and demand, we don't have enough, costs are really high. And we know that if we're gonna just keep up with the economic and population growth that we have by 2040, we need over 88,000 units. I mean, I don't use that number a ton. It's that came out of the latest housing needs assessment, just because, and I don't know if you experience this as energy advocates, but it just seems kind of unachievable in a way. So I like to break it down, but I thought you guys could handle it. There's also a mismatch with what we're building and what we can afford. So we know what the median wage is in the renter population in our state, and only 13% of the stock would be considered affordable for renters. And then I've sometimes described the housing crisis. I got this analogy from one of the founders of the housing movement, Cushing, the late Cushing Dolbear, who described it like a kind of a dark game of musical chairs, right? I don't know if you remember playing musical chairs as a kid, but as a small statured person, it was pretty awful for me, right? Because the big kid would come and push you off the chair. Well, in the housing crisis, right there, we keep taking away the chairs and blaming the people who can't access them. So imagine you're just coming out of school looking for your first job, can't find a chair, right? Say you're coming out of a domestic violence situation and your abusive partner ruined your credit. It's going to be really hard to find a chair. Say you're coming out of recovery, had a health crisis, you can just name all of it. And probably the worst outcome of our housing crisis is just not having a house or a home at all. And that's why we're seeing an increase in homelessness. And the face of homelessness is changing. We're seeing more older adults experiencing homelessness, so people on fixed incomes who are finding themselves at shelters. And we've seen an increase of 36% since 2019 in our median rent. So, sorry to start out so heavy on a beautiful Friday morning, but that is indeed a crisis. But sometimes crisis does get us to act. And so I want to talk about the political climate. And I started in this work 15 years ago, and I have seen remarkable change in the political climate. Affordable housing, the need for affordable housing is now the #1 issue, according to UNH Survey Center, for Granite Staters. This is crazy for New Hampshire. 75% of voters agree that we need more affordable housing, including multifamily. 61% say okay to density and apartments, right? And 59% of voters say, yes, in my backyard. They're willing to have more affordable housing options in their own backyard. And so we have seen a real change. It used to be 20 years ago just to get, or 15 years ago, just to get a candidate to say housing. In fact, I remember during the Obama administration with our national partner doing a domestic policy council at the White House and asking if President Obama would please say the word housing once. And they said, oh, well, he's willing to talk about the climate crisis, which is good for you guys, but he was not open to saying the word housing, but he would talk about home ownership. So we really see a change where you see candidates talking about housing. So now that I've shared that with you, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the tools we advocate for to address the crisis. And so as housing advocates, we're working on that capital piece because the way affordable housing is developed is through public-private partnerships. So we provide below market rate capital, and that below market rate financing translates into affordability that's passed on to folks who want to live in those homes, right? And we also look for rental subsidies for people who need extra support to be able to afford their home. We are, as advocates, looking to improve the process, the development process. And you guys are both, probably deal with the situation similar to us, right? You both need the regulations and then you despise the regulations, right? Because the regulations are keeping you from providing the tools for success, but at the same time you need them to provide that structure and understanding of where the right places are for us to build. So we find ourselves trying to streamline and make more sense of a development process that's often can be slowed to a point that is really not serving us well. We're really looking at land use, and Matt talked about how we develop these 88,000 units in our state. I mean, that's a real question for us. Like, are we going to do it on large lots far away from transit, or are we going to embrace a model where we recognize, our beautiful landscape and natural environment and provide walkable, denser communities and take advantage of New England's historic landmarks and village centers? And then finally, we are very concerned that we develop the housing for people who need services near services, and don't send them out far away. There was once a trend of saying we can help the homeless, but we should put them on islands. In fact, they did that in the city of Boston about 25 years ago, this idea that they were going to move people who needed services kind of away from public centers. And so we want to make sure that we have the tools and financing and services, but that we're bringing them where the people are so that they can continue to thrive and be part of our communities. Okay, so now I'm going to start with my case studies. Am I doing okay on time, Matt?
Doing great.
Doing great, okay. And I do recognize that I do have some housing friends that have joined us, so I'm really pleased. So you guys can throw me a softball question later. So I want to talk about the win from last year because this is one of those issues where people said you'll never be able to do this. So we were able last year to pass a package that said that municipalities can't ask for an unreasonable parking requirement. So municipalities will now be required to accept a parking alternative plan from a developer. They can challenge the plan, but they have to accept it. So for, say, someone developing in a downtown center with parking, with municipal parking like Portsmouth, if you don't have enough parking, you could say, recognize that we have public parking garages with leasing options, name the fact that the population you're serving isn't driving anymore, or working close and using local transit. We also said you can't require more than 1.5 spaces for any multifamily 10 units or more, or any studio or one bedroom that meets the definition of the workforce housing law. This was one of those, for those of you who do State House advocacy, this was one of those down to the wire, last day of committee of conference, Senate said no way, House said please. We were the final hour in committee of conference. It was a warm day. There was no air conditioning in the State House. They put us at the top of the LOB where we would be hot, and I just saw us on the schedule and thought, they have scheduled this conference to die. And it looked like it was going to die. And then a young millennial Republican from the House said to the Senate president, also a Republican, I am a renter in Salem, and I wake up every day and look at a parking lot of empty spaces. And that is a place where we could be building more housing on water, sewer infrastructure, or developing businesses for New Hampshire, and I'm tired of it. And I think the Senate president kind of saw like a different perspective in his party kind of coming up and went out and came in with this deal and really changed it. So I really credit Representative Joe Sweeney for swinging that. But it also took just not giving up till the end. So that was the win from last year. I do want to say before I jump into the next case study that there's been this conversation like state mandate versus local control, and that it's either or. And I just don't think that's true. I think that we are not a home rule state. We're a Dillon rule state, right? And so the state endows our communities to protect the health and safety of its residents. However, I think it's okay for the state to kind of have a loose leash, say, acknowledge there's a municipal interest in regulating parking, but to just say, when you're unreasonable, we're gonna pull that back, right? I mean, we have communities that were requiring 4 parking spots for 1 ADU. You know, clearly that's not a municipal interest in parking, right? That is a desire to keep people from developing accessory dwelling units. So I think it's okay for the state to say, to evaluate local regulations through a lens of reasonableness. And when issues pop up and then we're going to state lawmakers for relief of things that are happening at the municipal level, for them to have a discussion and set standards that are more reasonable. My next case study is I'm going to talk to you about the Housing Appeals Board. I'm going to do this again because people said this would be impossible. Remember, I talked to you about a process that often slows things down. There is a tactic, a judicial tactic. I mentioned I'm a law school graduate. My husband is also a practicing lawyer in our community. And sometimes when you don't want something built, you just, you can just tell them you're bringing them to Superior Court. And that can be really expensive. And for members of Housing Action New Hampshire, they often just will give up the project right away because they don't have the budget to deal with those kind of challenges in the judiciary because they can't pass the costs on to the end user. Say a luxury developer could spend 2 years in court and just raise the price of your rents. So this is a very New Hampshire solution. We based it on the BTLA, the Bureau of Tax and Land Appeals, which we've had in New Hampshire since 1977. And we basically said that we think we need to make this review process easier. So if you feel like there's been an injustice as you present your project at the municipal level, you now can go to an appeals board and get a decision in 150 days, and you do not need an attorney. You can go with your architect or your engineer. And this took a couple of bites at the apple, but we were eventually able to get this through. We were challenged with either bills to either repeal or weaken the board, 7 through 7 bills that we were able to beat back. So sometimes I think that when you get that policy progress, it's not over. You have a couple of years of defense to make it stick. This is the kind of topic du jour, I would say, and it's kind of interesting because it's not, accessory dwelling units, they're probably of big interest to you in terms of how we're going to develop that general density. But for us, it's really not necessarily affordable, except it just seems like it's the right thing to do. So if you're already a landowner, a property owner in New Hampshire in the live free or die state, and you want a place for your aging parents to live, you think you could use your own property for that, right? And so if you have a barn and you want to convert that, you think we would be able to do that. If you have adult kids with disabilities and you want a caretaker on the property, or you'd like them to grow into a house on your property, it seems like this is the kind of state we should start to allow more ADUs. So we were one of the first states in the nation to pass this in 2016, but it went through the sausage making process and came out with a lot of compromises. Essentially, the state law says every municipality has to have an ADU ordinance. It can be by right or special exception. And the state law says you have to allow attached, and you can require property owner that they have their residence there. And there have been bills in the last couple of years to expand on that. There is a bill last year to turn that into 2 ADUs, a little larger. The disability community would like it to be a little larger to accommodate wheelchairs and necessities for people living with disabilities. And it was passed by the House twice because it was reattached, and it failed in the Senate on party lines. And it is back there, LSRs this year, 2 LSRs in the House, and I expect 1 Senate bill. So I think And I believe that AARP is going to be taking a big part in this because this is really a big priority for them. And then residential conversions, this idea of taking your large single family on your large lot and making it into a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, right? It does, and again, seem like those gentle density options that have been controversial in the legislature. And so I think you'll see a lot of proposals again this year. I think we'll, need to talk about what that means when people, like we have such a severe crisis. If a landowner is making the best use of their property with their resources, we need to give them that freedom to do that, to take the pressure off the rest of the market. Last year, our win in this space was working with the state fire marshal and saying, hey, do you really think we need sprinklers for these conversions? Because the data is showing you don't. And they agreed, and so they worked with us on updating the fire code, and now you no longer are required to sprinkler anything up to a conversion up to fourplex. And then just looking ahead, what I think will be coming up, as I mentioned, this reasonableness standard around municipal regulation, improving the ADU law, probably getting to those residential conversions. We also have a new municipal incentive program called the Housing Champion Program that new Senator Rebecca Perkins-Coker got passed. And it's a super carrot, right? So you apply to U.S. Department of Business and Economic Affairs. If you've updated your zoning and meet certain criteria, you can get recognized as a housing champion, and then you get preferences around infrastructure funding. So that just rolled out like a month ago, so we're really excited about that. And then we'd like, you've heard a lot of candidates talk about streamlining permitting approvals, and last year our big win was driveways, where we asked DOT, we got to get your driveways, permitting is taking too long, you're a bottleneck, and so we agreed to 60 days, and if you don't get a permit for driveways for 60 days, then you get a permit by default. So that is what I have for you, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot from all of you today. And thank you for talking housing with me this morning.
Thank you, Alyssa. Probably could have done an entire panel session on just that topic. There's so much to get in there. Really interesting. I'm sure we're gonna have some good questions as we go. So if land use reform and some of these regulatory issues are part of the equation forming the housing and energy nexus, energy efficiency and the cost of utilities is clearly the next. Housing has to become more efficient to keep energy costs manageable. More energy efficient homes are also more resilient to changing climate conditions and have lower long-term cost of ownership. An important part of energy efficiency discussion for New Hampshire residents is beneficial electrification. Well over half of the residents in our state, including yours truly, heat with oil or propane. Much higher percentage of homeowners heating with those fuels than the national average. Very expensive fuel, and that's not to mention the cost of electricity that we heard about in the opening session, some of the highest in the entire country. Transitioning to energy efficient heat pumps is a foundational strategy underlying the entire energy transition as we talk about climate goals and electrification. And they can be very cost effective for consumers, particularly when you are converting from oil or propane to energy efficient heat pumps. This is a huge opportunity for our state to support emissions reductions while simultaneously reducing energy burden for our residents. So with that, I'll introduce our next speaker. It's Erin Cosgrove, Senior Manager of Policy and Programs with the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership. Erin will be talking to us about the influx of funding coming to New Hampshire in the coming years. This will be accelerating the adoption of heat pumps and other electrification technologies that will help reduce our energy costs and support the energy transition. Awesome. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and I'm so happy to be here today. Before I get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships is. So we are what's known as a regional energy efficiency organization, and there are 6 of these organizations located throughout the U.S., and we operate to really help the states within each of our territories identify transformational policies and initiatives that they can pursue and share best practices among them. So I'm here today to kind of provide an overview of the federal funding that's coming into New Hampshire and some insight of what we're seeing other states do. And I was going to start off by talking about delivered fuels and how expensive they are, as Matt highlighted. I have just a little bit more of data to fit into that, but I found online that 59% of New Hampshire residents use petroleum or delivered fuels. And while the national average for energy burden, which is how much a household spends on energy, is 6%, in New Hampshire, it's an average of 8%, sometimes as high as 11% for homes within this state. And that is largely due to the fact that the homes heat with delivered fuels. And then I'll also add that I am a resident of Vermont, and I moved there 1 year before Russia invaded Ukraine, and I had delivered fuels in my home. My bills doubled because of that, and I now have heat pumps, and I save $900 to $1,000 on my energy. I also have an EV, and they're all working. So what I'm hoping to talk about, what we're talking about, it can help, and it really does bring down energy bills within our region, but then there'll also be the electricity conversation to have, which we'll go to after. So with that, I will just kick off what I'm going to talk about today, which is all of the federal funding opportunities that are coming to New Hampshire. So I'm going to talk about 3 federal grants that will be entering the state in the next year or 2. And I'll just preview all 3 of them here, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail about what's been happening in other states for each and what one of them is. So the first is the Home Electrification and Appliance Rebates Grants, or HERE. And I'll say this is all coming from the Inflation Reduction Act, passed a few years ago now. But the Home Electrification and Appliance Rebate Program is a total of $4.5 billion nationally to fund efficient electrification of low and moderate income households only. This program covers appliances, installation costs, and enabling measures, such as upgrading circuit panels, insulation, air sealing, ventilation, and wiring. But one caveat of this is that it cannot actually be used to replace existing electric appliances. So the HERE, or Home Electrification program, has to be used to convert homes from fuel to electrification. The Home Efficiency Rebates, which has also been known as HOMES, or HER, is nationally $4.3 billion in rebates for whole home retrofit packages, and this is based on the reduction in home energy use. That's how the rebates will be decided, and the program covers building envelope measures, appliances, and HVAC replacement, as well as actually the performance of work or construction, and this program can be used to replace electric appliances. And as you can see, under both HERE and HOMES, New Hampshire is slated to receive about $34 million for each of those programs. And then the final program that I'm going to talk about today is actually a competitive grant that New Hampshire, along with 4 other states in New England, was awarded recently. And this is from the Climate Pollution Reduction Program run by the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency. And the CPRG competition was nearly $5 billion nationally in grants to states as a coalition, local governments, tribes, and territories, and it was designed to develop and implement ambitious plans for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I have in parentheses there PCAP, because the one caveat to receive the implementation grant was that the state included the measure in their primary climate action plan. So this was really a huge, wide-ranging ability for states to transform their market. And the New England Heat Pump Accelerator, which I'll go into more detail later, is going to be a 5-state program that totals $450 million to try to encourage the installation of efficient cold climate heat pumps and heat pump water heaters throughout the region, working with distributors and contractors, which is a different approach than what we see the HERE and the HOMES rebates coming at it with. So with that, I'll now kind of go into detail about each grant and provide some examples of what we're seeing in other states. So for the home electrification and appliance rebates, these rebates are to fund efficient electrification of low and moderate income households only, as I highlighted. And up here is actually from the New Hampshire DOE, what the rebate amounts they're assuming will be available in the state. And as I mentioned before, the program covers appliances as well as enabling measures. Another feature about the HERE program as compared to the HOMES program that I'll go into later is that these are required to be point of sale rebates, which means that the customer is not required to actually front the money. It'll be taken off immediately so that they'll never have to incur the initial costs. For New Hampshire specifically, DOE submitted this application in March 2024, and the application has been approved. So they're thinking about launching in the spring, summer of 2025. This is all from the DOE, New Hampshire DOE website that you can look at. And then I just wanted to highlight, especially after the conversation about housing, some trends that we're seeing through our region. So Maine has had their HERE program approved, and they're going to focus all of the rebates on manufactured homes and multifamily housing. They're also requiring that the rebates are only available to low-income residents for the first year of the program, and then they're opening them up to moderate-income residents the second year, hoping to tackle those with the highest need first. In Maryland, they're targeting fuel-switching customers only with this program, and in New Jersey, they're going to stand up their first ever statewide multifamily program using both HERE and HOMES together. Oh, yes?
Is this money in the pipeline in a way that it can't be sucked back in?
Yes. Yes. They are getting it out very quickly. But
Yeah.
also, I'll keep going so we can do questions
I'd
later.
I'd like to get through the remarks.
Yeah.
We'll take some questions at the end.
But that was a question on whether or not the upcoming election will influence anything that I'm talking about right now, and it shouldn't. So I'll just add that caveat. So on to the HOMES rebate. Oh, sorry, the HOMES rebate. So the HOMES rebate is actually just for whole home retrofit packages, and this program covers building measures, appliances, HVAC, and even the work to put this in the homes. And some interesting facts about what we're seeing happening. First I'll give you the timeline for New Hampshire. So New Hampshire has also submitted this application. I'll caveat also that New Hampshire DOE has submitted applications but not picked an implementer for the programs yet. So what these programs will look like in the state is still kind of TBD. But they did say on the website also that summer and early fall is when we expect the program to launch for New Hampshire. But then going on to talk about a little bit of what we're seeing in the region, and then again, highlighting again multifamily. Today, Washington, D.C. just announced that they're going to be using both HOMES and HERE to kickstart and invest more into what they're calling their Affordable Housing Retrofit Accelerator. And the Affordable Housing Retrofit Accelerator in D.C. is designed to help low-income and affordable housing owners comply with the building performance standard that the district has enacted. So they're specifically hoping to provide technical assistance and rebates to any affordable income housing multifamily building owner with these rebates. And then just also wanted to highlight that in Massachusetts, they're looking at investing in municipal energy efficiency programs. I'm sure all of us have heard about Mass Save and how nationally ranked it is, but the fact is that if you live in a co-op in Massachusetts, you actually don't have access to Mass Save. So if you have a muni utility, they're trying to find a way to make sure that they also have access to these energy efficiency programs and access to the robust funding that Mass Save has. And then finally, just to highlight, Rhode Island is sending all of their homes funding into pre-weatherization and pre-electrification, so knob and tube wiring and panel upgrades. And then they're also investing in products not included in their current energy efficiency programs, such as stoves and washers and dryers, so other appliances in the home that can help greatly reduce energy bills. And then my final preview will be on the New England Heat Pump Accelerator grant that's coming. I do not have a number for New Hampshire in this grant, but I can give you an idea of what will be coming and what it will look like for the region. This is supposed to kick off in the next year, and this grant will have 3 components to it. The first is what we're calling a market hub, and this is midstream incentives for heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. And what midstream incentives are is they actually kick in at the distributor level. So when a contractor goes to pick up an equipment, the equipment will be priced down. And because of the rebate appearing there, it will have a chain reaction to lower the price of the installation for the customer on the front end. And some programs have even required, where I live, Vermont, for example, requires that the contractor shows the rebate so that the customer knows they're receiving it. Midstream programs are also great because it ensures distributors have these items in stock. They work directly with the distributors and sometimes give them a small stipend to keep cold climate heat pumps and heat pump water heaters in stock. I can't think of the number, but it's normal practice for residents to need these items when things break. So the important thing is that when a contractor goes to a home and the hot water heater isn't working or your heating system isn't working, they can walk into a distributor that day and they can get an efficient equipment if that's what the customer wants. And so we're hoping that this program will help keep these items in stock. A second element of this program will be what we're calling an innovation hub. And this will be 1 to 2 large-scale grants that states can receive to tackle low-income barriers that they're seeing appear. Manufactured homes was something that came up in this area, as well as emergency replacement programs. So you have a truck ready to go with heat pump water heaters, or you install a gas water heater or whatever the customer has, wait for a heat pump water heater to arrive, and the contractor will go back to the home and install the heat pump water heater. And then the Innovation Hub will also include community grants. So this will be solely focused on overcoming barriers in New England specifically that we encounter when, for low-income communities, which can be rural or insulation, or just also making sure there's contractors and workforce in the area. And then the final component of this will be a resource hub. And the goal for the resource hub is to help aggregate all of the workforce materials, consumer education materials, and contractor engagement and training so that New England has a heat pump workforce or a cold climate heat pump workforce that knows how to size and install. And the goal being that at that point, contractors can travel and the workforce is ready to meet the demand and maybe hopefully drive down costs of this transition. And that covers everything for my slides. And I'll finish by saying I just talked a lot about electrification, and we all operate off delivered fuels. And so next, we're going to go into how we adjust the grid to take on that extra load. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. That was great and right on point. This, over $70 million of federal funds coming to New Hampshire in addition to the current spending is going to have a massive impact in our state. And I think one of the things that really excites me is that it really expands the reach of NH Saves. To an extent, NH Saves has been handcuffed by the PUC in terms of what they can acquire for resources outside of regulated fuels. So it's a really exciting time. From my perch as a workforce coordinator, I have to say that the workforce is stressed currently. We're stressed today, and this is going to significantly exacerbate that stress. So just to kind of tie it back to the housing, doesn't really have to do with my remarks, but I just wanted to say it because it's something that I feel. When I talk to my family and friends about energy and climate, and I get excited about these types of topics, about electrification and about electrified transportation and heating and cooling, the question that I get most is, can the grid even handle it? And honestly, it's a good question. And my answer is typically that I'm not sure that the grid, as we have thought about it for the last 100+ years, is really able to handle it. And in the same vein, I'm not sure that our current energy markets, in which consumers are largely conditioned to pay the same price for electricity, regardless of when they use it, is sustainable in this model. So fact one, in my opinion, is that fundamental change is needed. Fact two is that the actual price of electricity varies throughout the course of the day and between seasons. Energy is a commodity, and as with any other commodity, the price varies with supply and demand. Okay. Something like that. Fact 3 is that our regional transmission operator, ISO New England, is seeing significant increases in both renewable energy generation and energy storage assets. These factors, combined with a regional push to electrify heating and transportation, regardless of the extent to which New Hampshire plays in all of this, are shifting the regional load shape and creating new market dynamics. The energy markets and our electric grid overall are ripe for innovation, and I believe strongly that it is this innovation that will ultimately carry us forward to a more decarbonized future. So with that, our final speaker is Josh Brock, Vice President of CCA Commercial Operations at Calpine Corporation. Josh and his Calpine team are deeply involved in the Community Power Coalition movement in New Hampshire and at the forefront of helping communities take control of their power. They are data and market-driven leading minds in our industry, and I'm thrilled to have Josh today as our final speaker to talk about these market dynamics and the opportunities and challenges they present. Welcome.
All right. Hope y'all can hear me okay. For those of you who weren't here this morning, I want to start off my comments with just a quick recap of two things. Yes, I am everything that he just said. Energy, markets, data, utilities, like that's what they pay me for, ostensibly. I like to think I'm a wonderful spokesperson and a terrible salesman, so allow me to jump on the terrible salesman side of this. Part of why I was excited to be on this panel, and as I shared this morning, I come from a history that is not that uncommon for many of us, which is I grew up housing insecure, I grew up food insecure, I had a single mom. Domestic violence was not uncommon in my childhood, and I was homeless for a portion of my life. And there was a journey that took me from that experience, which again is mirrored by so many people, I would imagine, in this room, but also in our communities, right? And those pieces of those experiences and those pieces of us that happen at early ages and beyond that have a significant impact on everything around us. That includes how we think about housing, how we think about where we want to work, what we want to do, what we want to accomplish in our lives. And foundational and fundamental to all of that are these very important things, like what is the economics of housing, right? How do you transition from homelessness to housed, and how do you transition from housed to homelessness, right? Like what are the symptoms that move back and forth between those, right? And so even though today we're talking about housing affordability in some way, and the energy sector, underneath all of that are these pieces, right? And so I share this because my job today is to deliver on some of the things that are relevant to the work that I do, but I also want to connect that to the very human pieces of what it is to think about this and what the impacts are on our communities and the people that we serve and the reason that we try and show up to do all of this stuff. So that's my personal history. That's a big motivator in what I do. It helps drive a lot of what I do professionally, and it also helps me foundationally always get back to what is the problem I'm trying to solve for, and how do I do this in a way that really reflects the humanity that is underneath all of these intellectual and conceptual ideas that we fall back upon. Real quick. We had a lot on energy and energy systems and energy grid this morning with our keynote speaker. I'm curious if people sort of have the fundamentals of like how do we price electricity? Like if you feel like you might have a hand on that, raise your hand. Okay, cool. So let me give you the very simplified version. There's the cost of the system, the infrastructure. There's the cost of the electricity. You take all of that, and then that's your denominator. Hold on, dollars per kilowatt. Yeah, no, that's your numerator. Work with me on this. And then underneath that is the volume, like how much energy is sold, right? How many kilowatt hours and choose your number, right? But we use, or choose your unit, but kilowatt hours is our fundamental basis, right? At the end of the day, what you get is a dollars per kilowatt hour cost, right? There's lots of stuff baked into all of that, right? So I've given you the super simplified version, but that's functionally what we call our levelized cost of energy, right? And that's how we think about it. So we can affect both the numerator and the denominator, right? But as we move, and this is where it gets into what we're here to talk about today, as we move into electrification, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be increasing the volume of energy used, right? Which is important. However, there's a scale at which that actually will bring down the cost per kilowatt hour, right? So more throughput means that you can smear that cost across more people, more units, right? So that can be a good thing. So more electrification has this potential benefit, right? But there's this valley where we're going to try and electrify stuff. And as you heard today, we're really focused on electrifying and providing support for those most in need, low-income, moderate-income communities, right, and individuals. But we're not at a place where there's so much electrification taking place that we are dramatically affecting the overall cost of energy, right? And let's put on top of that energy markets, right? We talked about the war in Ukraine and how that had a huge impact on the gas market. Gas drives energy, right? And so we had these huge energy spikes, right? So there's stuff that's outside of our control, right? Markets are markets. But we're not in a place right now that we are fundamentally affecting the volume that's being sold there. We're pushing for it, right? But what that means is, as we think about electrification, as we think about more heat pumps, as we think about fuel switching, as we think about moving, especially, our affordable homes, our low-income and moderate-income residents, whether they're in designated affordable housing or not, we're asking them, please electrify. This has benefits, and we can talk about that. But we are also, if you think about this, we're asking them to spend more on energy, right? And the reason for that, even though delivered fuels are expensive, right, and they are subject to more variability, if this unit, if this person, if this community already has a lot of energy burden, and what I like to think of energy poverty, especially in that part of the population, as you electrify, you are potentially taking affordable sources, and this is more true in natural gas than delivered fuel, but you're taking sources of energy that are potentially less expensive on a what it costs me as a person basis to something that's potentially more expensive. And as we move to time variable rates, and we will and need to, the when you use energy matters, right? Which is weird for us when we don't really think about energy as something that we have control over. You don't often think like, oh crap, like I shouldn't be turning on all these switches right now, or like I need to do my clothes like on Saturday when energy's cheap. Like I think like that because I'm a nerd and this is the stuff that I'm interested in. But y'all don't, and we're now asking all of us to think about that. Like that's a big change, right? That's a societal transition in terms of how we conceptualize energy now as something that is part of our lives, whereas it's passive, it just shows up, right? The only time we really think about energy is when the grid goes down, like a northeaster blows through and you're like, okay, candles, like let's do this. We've done this before, we're gonna do it again. And then thing comes back online. But you all know this, which is at some point when the grid down is long enough, then we think about like the refrigeration train breaks down, all the food in my fridge is spoiled, like how much backup resources do I have to handle all of this, right? So there's this huge effort that we all get into to like restore the grid as soon as possible. Okay, so foundational, we've got these concerns about what happens if the grid goes down. We've got these concerns about cost. We need to electrify. There's lots of benefits to it, right? And now we want to target those benefits to those most in need, but we run the risk of increasing their energy burden and their energy poverty. Okay, so there's your problem statement, right? Everyone relatively, like, are we here? All right, cool. All right, so then you stack on top of that, we're moving to a grid of greater intermittent resources, solar, wind, you know, I'm throwing more out there. I should know this. I'm an energy person. Geothermal's not intermittent, but I suppose it could be. We're moving to more intermittent resources, and we're building things on top of that to help solve for this intermittency, right? So the market is going to have this wholesale market where like solar's cheap, like use it in the energy in the day, and then oh my God, it's nighttime. There is no solar to be had. Like, is the wind blowing or not, right? If not, you've got to fire up some sort of thermal resource, or you have to get the batteries to discharge, or something else that's going to provide power on the grid, right? So the wholesale market's going to solve for all of these challenges, right? And there's a cost for all of these different resources to deliver to the grid. And then us on the other side, like we're agnostic to that. Like we don't control any of that. We're not thinking about that. Again, we're barely thinking about when we turn on energy, right? But we're gonna move into a wholesale paradigm where it really matters. Like it's going to matter when we use electricity. What that spike looks like, what that energy curve looks like on the wholesale side will dictate what we build, which means that'll also dictate the cost. So now we get back into the numerator, right? Like, if we have to build really expensive resources to serve this super, you know, peaky part of our load where only it's like we all get home and we're like, oh crap, it's cold and I'm hungry and like I need to take a shower. You're like, boom, like charge my car, turn on the stove, get the hot water heater going, heat up the house, and you're just like, there's this big ramp, right? And so you could have these huge ramps that take place just so that we can solve for our fundamental needs, right? And if we just allow that to happen unmitigated, then we're going to have to build really expensive resources to solve for very, very small periods of time. Okay, so what we build matters, how we use energy matters, and how it affects our population are things that we have to think about. Okay, so now let's move forward to like what does that mean and how do we think about that and what can we potentially do to solve for this in a housing basis, right? So we're going to spend all this money to upgrade homes, we're going to improve systems, we're going to try to electrify. I will note that electrification also has massive indoor air quality benefits for those of us that lives in homes. Like burning of anything inside your home is the greatest contributor to asthmatic emissions that you will expose yourselves to, and you will do it on your own accord. Like, you are functionally choosing to like increase your risk of lung disease and other asthmatic causing conditions. And it gets worse if you have large families in there, if you have children, these type of things. If that is the population that's in that home, there's risk that we're delivering to them by allowing the continued use of these fuels, right? And so we should think about that, and there's a benefit, therefore, to that electrification that we are now quantifying. It's something that'll show up elsewhere, but it means that our communities over the long run could be healthier. So that's one benefit that we are going to eventually realize in this transition. But on top of that, we're going to be spending all this money to put in heat pumps, to put in water heaters, to do all these things that are going to electrify. We have the technology to control that, right? To use this in a smarter way, right? So we could have, for example, when solar peaks, we could have everything that's storing energy, which is your water heater, we could have them ramp up and just store that water, ramp it up to 150, 160, 170 degrees, super hot, right? And then there's very inexpensive valves that will then mix that, so when it gets delivered to you, you're not boiling your skin, right? But it's storing all that heat using really, really cheap, or sometimes free, depending on the wholesale market, like energy, right? And that avoids that need when you get home, or like, oh my God, I need a shower. Well, cool, your water heater's ready to go. It doesn't have to fire up right now. So we have these capabilities, and the same can be true for lots of other stuff. And as we add other behind-the-meter resources, and heat pumps are just a great example of this, but batteries, thermostats, these other things, we can now be in a place where demand can be treated as a supply resource. We also call this demand flexibility. And more important, this is great. Sorry, two things. We're now solving for this idea of like, energy needs to be variable, our use needs to be variable, and it needs to better follow wholesale markets, right? But it's hard for us as consumers to have full control of that because we have lots of automated systems, right? And especially if we're all just busy people, then it's hard to really think about like, oh, I need to do this, and like that's on top of like, what am I gonna cook for dinner, and like, why is my kid so grumpy this morning or this evening, and like, what social emotional thing do I need to solve for? As a father of 2 teenagers, I think about that a lot. On top of like, oh, do I need to think about my water heater right now? Like, it's a lot to ask of us, right? So like, automation is possible, and as we install these new systems and invest this money, we're going to have the capabilities and the possibilities to now deliver this in a way that is automated and can be controlled at the grid level. And here's where all of this comes together. Yes, here's where all of this comes together. We are in the early stages, but we're moving down a trajectory where, while we are in one way potentially increasing the energy burden to those who can least afford to do so, and we will think about that and find ways to address that, but we're also in a place that where if we have markets that can both recognize big generators, solar systems, thermal plants, like wind, all that type of stuff, and we can pay them. We know what they generated. We can pay them for that because that's an easy thing to do. We know that math. On this other side, we're moving to a place where we have the capabilities now to determine, oh, you change the way that you use energy, I can pay you for that because now you're providing a grid service, right? You change the way you use energy because either I had to buy this from a wholesale generator, a large system, or if you were to lower your energy, I can actually not buy that, and instead of redirecting that money over here, I can just pay you, right? And that can show up on a regular basis. So the more dynamic and the more flexibility that those end uses have, the more that on the wholesale side, which is the work that we do with like CPCNH and others, we can actually pay you as residents to be a part of the grid, to be a citizen of the grid, and to support this transition, right? And so as we electrify, we're potentially saying, yes, this could increase your costs, but we're also giving you systems that now have a revenue stream tied to it. And for a cost that is an uncapped liability, like we are all going to pay our energy bills. In fact, it's one of the most reliable things we will do. People will pay their energy bill before they pay their rent. I can tell you about that. I've had to make that choice before, right? So we will pay our energy bills, one of the most important things that we do, right? And so by having this synergy come together where we can now have markets where wholesale and people like us can participate in that and provide grid services, we now can redirect money back into the communities that we all reside in, right? Which is a great connection to the mission of community power agencies, which is my passion. But it also means that we can more equitably transition our housing and our residents into a place where they can both benefit from electrification, lower exposure to asthmatic emissions, better indoor air quality, but also less energy burden, less energy poverty, right? So where do we go from here to execute on that? This is going to be self-serving, but as like a data and energy person, I'm going to tell you we need more data. And so that's my, I'm going to get into that, but that's really the thing here. We need data a lot. We need it at a high frequency. We need it at a reliable, and we need it at a very accurate basis, and there's ways that we can further effectuate that with our metering infrastructure and other places. But what we're doing is we're going to move the residential and the commercial world, all of us with meters at our end uses, we're going to move it to a place where those meters are able to provide us enough data in the same way that we get data from wholesale generators, that we can then take that and now pay you for your support onto the grid. And in doing so, we both empower the transition to a more affordable and reliable grid, but we also are able to do it in a way that can best support the affordability of housing and support the residents and businesses that are most in need of these benefits. Okay. Thank you, and I'll leave it there for now.
All right. Well, with that, I think we have taken you all on quite the journey through these three great presentations. Really appreciate all of those. I'd like to open it up for questions. I'll let you sort this through, Sarah.
You asked, is it on? Yep. You asked whether we were on board with your assumption about that we were increasing costs by electrifying. I wasn't on board yet. I thought we were saving money by putting in heat pumps, insulating, doing all of that. So you could explain a little more.
Yeah, that's a fair question. I cast that in the context of at a national level, natural gas, and so the local context matters. End use like propane, wood pellets, these type of things are more expensive, and so absolutely the electrification of those pieces are going to reduce costs. So that is a fair context that's important, right? But in the context of natural gas or other delivered, generally like infrastructure delivered end uses that isn't electricity, that is very, very cheap for a variety of reasons. And so as we electrify that, we're going to have an affordability issue that we create.
I'd say the same thing. I see it in my work, and particularly on the gas to electric is challenging in our region. But something else that is kind of nuanced about the transition to heat pumps is the concept of partial displacement, which means you bring a heat pump in, but you're not trying to displace your full native heating system, and exactly kind of how that integration works. It's an issue that the industry is sorting through right now, and can certainly have an impact on fuel costs as well.
Hi, is this working? Gabrielle Watson from the Tamworth Energy Committee. Question for everybody, or request that I'd love to see the slides that were presented. So if that's possible, I don't know if those are going to be shared, if somebody could get the answer on that. But the challenge that you're talking about, like we need the data, I'm wondering in order to do time of use rates that could save people a lot of money and incentivize energy use at a time when energy prices are low. What is it going to take in New Hampshire for us to get to the place where we have enough smart meters and we have access to the data for that to happen? Is it regulatory? Is it the utilities? What are the blockages right now?
Yeah, I can maybe start us off on that. So yeah, I mean, it's an infrastructure investment, right? So we're asking for smart meters. Now that's not the only solution. There's other ways that we could address this, but at scale, you need the mass deployment of smart meters. But that can't be, you can't do that in isolation. And so the real thing, we see this nationwide in our work, is that you get a smart meter deployment happen, but they don't build the infrastructure to really utilize the data that's provided and all of that. And so like they take a smart meter and they suck in whatever data it's providing and make it dumb. And so they're like, cool, I'm getting data at the 15-minute interval, but like my system only gives me a monthly view on it. So here you go. And it's a huge, you lose all the benefits of that, right? So yes, we need like the utilities and the regulators to sort of like support that deployment, but they also have to make sure that the infrastructure that's deployed behind that is delivering us that data. And importantly, that when that data is getting delivered to us, that we all have accessibility, right? So there's this idea of like data right and data ownership. I own the data that is my usage, and I should, one, be able to deliver that to anyone that I want to, right? And so that the infrastructure needs to allow for that because it's my data. And there's lots of companies that want to use that to then provide me a service, and I should be able to benefit from that. And those of us that participate in the market should have access to that data so that we can effectuate this, like this transition I was just talking about, demand flexibility. Like, yeah.
My question is, what specifically needs to happen in order to get to that vision that you're describing? Is it Eversource that doesn't have smart meters? Is there legislation that we need to pass to require utilities to provide that data? What's standing in the way?
Yeah, so I'm less familiar with where we're at in New Hampshire, and so I'm not going to be the expert on that. But what I do think is important for us to think about is this is a large infrastructure cost, right? And so how do we do it? Where is the PUC currently at as it views that? Does it see the benefits of it? And if not, like how do we articulate that in a way that there's going to be shared benefits? Because the utilities are going to be 100% behind this. At the end of the day, because they make money on infrastructure, right? We learned about, the guaranteed return on investment. So they will be behind it. It's just a matter of making sure that we get all the pieces that we need in that deployment that we're all going to be able to benefit from that. I have a lot to learn on specifically what's happening in New Hampshire, and I'd love to learn and partner with more of you on how we make that happen.
Oh, and
I'll add quickly. I think it's two things that come to mind for me. One would be more teeth in the state energy policy, right? And kind of the roadmap and where they're aiming and trying to embrace this future. It is really not particularly well reflected in the state strategy right now. And then the second in my mind is the cost-benefit analysis of all this and kind of exactly what you were talking about and the ability to kind of affect load shift and what that means in terms of pricing. In my experience, kind of working through different facets of energy in New Hampshire, like that's what they need to see in order to get behind it. They need to understand that there's going to be a direct correlation to bills and value added. I don't think we're there quite yet, but it seems like we're getting there quickly. Did you have something to add there?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to kind of highlight, I think, 3 areas where it's, I've seen other New England states kind of take initiatives to center efficiency and timing or time of use rates. But I think the first area for New Hampshire is really just recentering and prioritizing energy efficiency programs for the utilities. I think it was 2018, 2019, New Hampshire almost had a proposal for a nation-leading energy efficiency program with an updated cost-benefit analysis with more stringent energy efficiency goals. But that was turned down by the PUC, and it has kind of been divested in since then. Luckily, advocates were able to get the bill passed. I can't remember the name of it now, but there is in statute at least an energy savings goal, and it keeps the Granite State test, which is the cost-benefit analysis for efficiency programs, intact, which actually accounts for greenhouse gas emissions. So there's the opportunity to invest in those technologies for energy efficiency programs, but there needs to be more focus on the importance of it. And I think recognizing how vital they are to continuing the rest of the transformation. Because once you're in a home with an efficiency program, you can put demand flex technology in that home, and then you see the benefit of that, and you can bring the utilities to the table to talk about virtual power plants, distributed energy resources. Another policy to highlight is in Connecticut, there is a proceeding for something called a performance-based rate, which looks to just change how rates are decided. So instead of rates for infrastructure build-out and capitalizing on the investment, you actually are paid based on meeting goals and standards, and you get performance incentives or additional ROE if you hit those. And those include reliability, service, affordability, and a whole different standard of metrics. Connecticut's been trying to tackle this for a few years now. Hawaii did it through a multi-year program session, but it changes how utilities make money so that they have to think about how good their service is. And then the final thing is just looking at the mandate for the PUC. Massachusetts and I believe Maine have mandates that they think equitably and about the climate when they make decisions. And while it's just one word, that can force different conversations to happen in that regulatory environment and prioritize different projects. So just wanted to add those 3 kind of key points.
Right on point with all 3 in my book.
I was going to jump in. Is this on? Oh, I guess a little bit. So I'm Scott Maslansky. I work with the Community Development Finance Authority out of Concord. We're a statewide organization. We do a lot of funding and financing in community and economic development, and I work in clean energy there. And first I want to thank you all, but I especially want to thank Alyssa, because I know you at the beginning said something about sort of wondering if you were the right person for the job today. And to me, especially at this conference, which I've been coming to for many, many years, it's extremely important to make sure we have voices that aren't purely energy voices or totally focused on energy, because that's the only way that we understand in the energy world how to extend ourselves and really understand what's going on in the rest of the world. So thank you. And that said, given the conversation that's happening here, when I hear about all the incentives, Aaron, that you mentioned and such, it made me think about the project I just did in my house, which was essentially an ADU for my mother-in-law to move in with us, put on heat pumps, put on solar, and the challenges I had as someone who's kind of an energy geek myself to even make some decisions, to look into this, to decide on what incentives were going to work for me, et cetera. And when I think about, hopefully some of the midstream incentives people won't have to worry about on the far end, but did that sort of bring up any thoughts for you, Alyssa, about some of the challenges ahead for, either homeowners, who have more of an energy burden challenge, or even folks in rental situations who might have to make some decisions, some of the challenges in understanding all of this, because I think it's going to be pretty challenging, a big.
Well, thank you, Scott, for the comments. And and congratulations on getting your ADU through. So I think for me, your story and your question bring up the issue around technical assistance. And it sounds like in your field, for the consumer and generally, like that's a need, right? So, I mean, I was, just as you guys were speaking, we're just, it's hard not to think a little bit like, well, how could I save a little bit of money too at home, and what's coming down the pike that will benefit me, and where do I go for that information? And I just think what we're seeing right now, so there is currently in the legislature, there is a special committee on exploring the impacts of the housing crisis on people with disabilities. And I tell you, the stories are so moving and so brutal, and what parents are going through. And so we have regulatory barriers to grouping people with disabilities together in a home, right? Because we went from this group home model as a nation, and the pendulum has swung so far the other way. You cannot have more than 3, people with disabilities living together without, very strict licensure. And as a parent tries to navigate how to find housing solutions, they don't have a place to go. And so one of the outcomes of this study committee might be recommending that TA, and that TA probably should not sit in state government. It should probably sit somewhere else. And so what does that look like? So as someone interested in developing an ADU, you're going to come up, again, on the cost. It's not cheap, right? And so what kind of financing models are out there? What kind of TA? What can we, there's all this advancement in modular housing, right? And so where do we go for this information, and how could we come together and build green and build to serve, right, at the same time? And it just seems like as a state, we haven't found that spot for the hardest audience of all to create a program for, and that is the general public. But we definitely need more technical assistance. Thanks for the question.
Hi there. I am Representative Wendy Thomas. I sit on Science, Technology, and Energy, and I've already submitted an early LSR that would update the building energy codes to 2021 from 2018. Now, the big pushback that we're getting already is that it increases, the initial cost for building is increased, even though it compares to the long-term savings and greater resale capability. So my question is, how do we convince builders and homeowners and renters that the long-term savings is worth the initial bite? And what do you see as the potential impact on housing in New Hampshire if we update these codes?
Should I take this one? I feel like I'm in your hearing room, Representative. Thank you for the question. As you know, there was a debate about that last session, and Home Builders and Remodelers Association was not Housing Action New Hampshire. Home Builders and Remodelers Association was the organization that organized to not update the energy code, citing additional costs. I was asked this at a recent AIA conference, the architects, what is it going to take? And so this is what I said to them, so I'll share it with you. My members are mission-oriented people. They are mostly nonprofit developers who are mission-oriented with a goal of serving their communities through building more affordable options. I think that they are kind of the perfect audience to pitch green incentives to, but for them, they have to meet a lot, they have to jump a lot of hoops, meet a lot of criteria to build at a certain level, right? Because you have this tension in affordable housing, right? You have essentially a public subsidy, and so that public subsidy, they don't want you building housing that's too expensive. If it starts, they want it to be nice to fit in their neighborhood. They don't want it to be too nice because, you know, they don't want that public subsidy building you luxury housing. So there is a financial incentive long-term that needs to be integrated into the programs and competitions they're already in. So when they are competing for the low-income housing tax credit at New Hampshire Housing, the qualified allocation program needs to reward them for that kind of building. And we do, our members, we have the first net zero for multifamily at Twin Pines Housing Trust in the Upper Valley, 2 passive houses in the Lakes region through Lakes Region Community Developers. So in many ways, as Ignatius McClellan at New Hampshire Housing tells me, we are all conspirators for the greater good, but we just haven't figured out how to align our programs and our silos and get together. That's my response.
I can add 2 more maybe thoughts to that. The first is that I'll just highlight that New Hampshire is not the only state in seeing that resistance from the building community. I have a counterpart team at NEEP that works exclusively on codes, and I know we have kind of resources around costs of codes updates, so I can make sure to find a way to connect with you. And then the other thing is, there's also, I think, an issue of just contractor education about the technology and installing the technology and gaining their comfort with the technology. Because I think there's kind of a gap where we're forcing policies where we implement these new measures, but we're not trying to also equally engage the workforce and the contractors. So if you come at them and say, you have to do this now, which is different than what you've been installing in the past, you'll likely hit some resistance. So I think it's a collective kind of action thing that we all need to think about, states, regionally, locally. But how do we both push policies from the top down and then educate contractors on with the technology to get them comfortable with it and make sure they understand what it means when these policies are enacted?
So I take it as both your organizations will help support us being moved to get 2021 codes accepted at the state level?
We could. We can talk, yes.
I'll bring it back to my policy committee. How's that? Yeah.
My name is Paul Bemis. I'm the former president of the ASHRAE organization in the state of New Hampshire. Worked very hard on these 2021 codes. Heat pumps are wonderful. They're a wonderful device. I support heat pumps, like them. They're great. If the building envelope isn't sufficient to hold the heat or cooling in, then they don't work that well because you get thermal gradients in the house. If any of you have these, you know you walk on one side of the home and it's cool and the other side is warm. Building envelope is critical to making the occupants happy, comfortable with respect to all of this stuff. So heat pump by itself is not the end-all and be-all. You have to have a sufficient building envelope to handle it. And here in our state, to the other point with respect to regulation, it's really the PUC who we're struggling with, as well as the legislature, to move this stuff forward. You mentioned data. Right now, the issue we're having with community power is load settling. Trying to, we can read the information, even if we don't get it through the smart meter, we can get it from the solar array. We can get at the data. It's settling the load with respect to the ISO and getting credit for it, which is where we're stuck right now with community power. So these things are gumming up the gears tremendously.
Thanks,
can-
Paul. Yeah, I want to agree with your comments regarding the importance of building envelope. And I think, one nugget to maybe consider, in your fight to try to update this is that the ICC codes they're an integrated family of codes, right? So when you, as a state, adopt the 2021 versions of everything, but leave energy at the 2018, you're creating a snarled mess for yourself. And it's only going to get worse over time. It's just not how they're meant to move. I'm not sure that the actual movement between the 18 and the 21 is as extreme as sometimes it's made out to be. And so, yeah, I think that could be part of the argument as well. But it's a very charged issue, of course.
And I didn't hear a question, so I'll just say yes, like, definitely, those are all important things to solve, and I am more than willing to nerd out on like the challenges of the ISO. And I'll just note with the heat pump and the heat gradient, like absolutely we need to deal with building envelope, but if like you're going to replace something on an emergency basis, I'd much rather have a more affordable crappy heating system than a unaffordable fossil fuel using heating system. And like, yes, let's get to the building envelope as well, but like where the intervention takes place, we need to meet people where they're at, right, and intervene there, and then try and get them to intervene in other places on top of that as well. So like both are important.
Oh, and
I'm gonna beat the drum, and maybe I shouldn't, but I'm just gonna say we have a massive issue with enforcement in this state too. So the code is great, right? But I hear anecdotes about builders who say, on one job I'm getting hounded, for my closeout test, and the other they say they don't even want to see it. Right, and I think that is a big part of kind of the overall kind of compliance and code issue that kind of goes hand in hand. So.
Oh, and I just want to add one more thing to that comment, because I work at NEEP, and we also create the cold climate heat pump list. So I have to just re-emphasize that it is better to envelope and seal the home. That does lower the energy cost, but heat pumps can work up to -15. I had mine as the only heating source in my home up to -18, down to -18. And then also, while it is important to weatherize, a lot of programs are kind of hitting a bottleneck where you either can put a heat pump in a home or you can weatherize the home. And so Maine's philosophy is get the heat pump in the home and then advertise weatherization, offer it for free, let them queue it up so that afterwards you can go in the home and weatherize. And then also a lot of factors go into how efficient a heat pump is at heating a home, including if it was properly sized and how the contractor designed it, which kind of goes back to the workforce issue. And then also to echo what was said earlier, heat pumps are 3 to 2 times more efficient than an oil boiler. So at some point, even if it is an inefficient home, which is not ideal, there is still more efficiency from the unit that's inside the home. But weatherization is important.
Great.
Yeah, there you go.
All right,
Those are the cold
we will.
ones.
We gotta close it there because we're over time. But I think all 4 of us are going to be sticking around for some time here. So thank you everybody for participating. Leave lunch is served.
Good to be at the table with you.
Oh my God, it was wonderful to meet you. And I have another